the Celts. An Iron Age society so gay the ancient Greeks felt the need to call them out. And I mean, why should any of us be surprised? After all, in the West, Gaelic was the common tongue. Fulcheru, I'm Ailey, and today I thought I would open my new YouTube channel by talking about the fact that Celts were probably rather gay. So to start us off, I have some historical sources for you, starting with the Greek historian and geographer Strabo, who lived circa 64 BCE to 24 CE. He said, "It is well known the Celts are fond of disputes, and that homosexuality is not considered shameful amongst them." Which, you know, sounds a little bit to me like the Celts subscribed to the wise maxim, be gay, do crime. We also have a quote from another classical historian, Diodurus Siculus, who said, "Although their wives are comely, they have very little to do with them. They rather want, in outlandish fashion, for the embraces of males. It is their practice to sleep upon the grounds on the skins of wild beasts, and to tumble with a male lover on either side." I'm just going to mention there is a tone of shock from Diodorus. This does seem to be different to the Mediterranean idea of pedestry, where it was an older man and a younger companion. What we're looking at is an actual relationship between equals, which, you know, is entirely barbaric and absolutely not acceptable to the civilized people of the Mediterranean. We have older observations too. So Aristotle, who lived in the 6th century BCE, brings up in his Politica how the Celts, unlike other very military nations, don't face the problem of women having too much power because, unlike many other places, they openly approve of relationships between men. Aristotle finding ways to be sexist there, always on form. However, these quotes together shows that there was acceptance of male same-sex relationships amongst the Celts for at least 600 years, which by my estimation is a long-ass time. So the reason why I'm talking about this today, and I want to make this clear, is not because I think it justifies why it's okay for people from the LGBTQA community to be modern-day pagans, right? Because I don't think they need a justification. The history could say the exact opposite. It could say the Celts openly despised a people we would now consider queer, and I would still stand by the rights of my LGBTQA siblings to follow whatever faith they want. One of the joys and responsibilities of modern paganism is it's a non-dogmatic, non-orthodoxic faith. We have a responsibility to use our brains and do what we think is right. I am not interested in binding myself or anybody else to an Iron Age code of what's right and wrong. Instead, I'm bringing it up because it's a useful piece of information to know when we're analysing the stories we have left around the Celtic traditions, so things like the Irish cycles or the Welsh Mabinogion. Now, before you type that comment, I am very well aware that it's not a good idea to over-conflate the insular Celts with the continental Celts. So, quick rundown on this. When the classical writers were talking about the Celts, they were talking about a people who lived on Western continental Europe. We could call the insular Celts Celtic for linguistic reasons, but that doesn't mean that they shared the same culture any more than the people who live in modern-day Brazil and Italy share the same culture just because they both happen to speak a Romance language. So before we talk about the Irish cycles, I do want to bring up an extra little bit of evidence, which is to talk about the Brehon law. For those of you that don't know, these laws were an early medieval Irish law set that, according to the Census Mall, were recorded by Patrick when he interviewed all the Druids. And he took those laws, he corrected them where Christianity said they were wrong, and then he wrote them down in plain language so that everybody could understand them, not just the educated elite. This story is very unlikely to be literally true, but what it does show is that there was an understanding in medieval Ireland that these laws had older pre-Christian roots. There is one reference to homosexuality, and that's saying that a woman can get a divorce if her husband only sleeps with other men and never her, right? So that's a fertility issue. He's denying her her marital right to have a child, and that's why she can divorce him. There's no other mention of homosexuality, no condemnation, no real punishment, right? So there is this evidence that whilst they were aware of homosexuality, because LGBTQA people have always existed, they didn't have any issue with it. They didn't see it as a problem. They didn't care. This, combined with what we know about the continental Celts, makes me feel pretty happy that we can say, hey, they were probably a little bit gay, right? So if we accept that the pre-Christian Irish were unlikely to have had any issue with male same-sex relationships and probably saw it as pretty normal, this is probably one of the things we can expect Christianity to have altered within the stories. The Irish cycles were written down hundreds of years after Christianity had already arrived in Ireland, and they were written down by Christian monks. So it is not unreasonable to suggest that if in the older stories 2 strapping young men had been lovers, they might reword it to say, I don't know, foster brothers. Especially in the stories that are meant to be about heroic male masculine ideals. Stories around, oh, I don't know, perhaps Cu Chulainn. Very brief on Cu Chulainn. He is a mythological figure who shows up a lot in the Irish stories and also shows up in the folklore of the Isle of Man and of Scotland. So he was important across the Gaelic tradition. In these stories, Cu Chulainn isn't presented as an unambiguously good guy. In fact, he does some really terrible things. And in the description, I've popped in some trigger warnings for people who want to read the source material, just so they can be prepared for some of the problematic stuff around him. Now, he had a foster brother, in the text, a close and beloved male friend called Ferdia. The 2 trained together under the fierce warrior Scatha in her fortress in Scotland. And here, the 2 of them shared a bed. The story with the 2 of them in is the Battle Road of Cuchulain, where they find themselves on either side of the conflict, with Cu Chulainn being the sole defender of the men of Ulster and therefore has invoked the right of single combat, and Queen Maeve having persuaded Ferdia to stand up against him. I want to note, it is not with the promise of the friendship of her thighs that Queen Maeve convinces Ferdia. Instead, she suggests that Cu Chulainn has slighted Ferdia's honour and has previously implied that should he fail to defend her, she herself will slight his honour. When Ferdia resigns himself to having to face Cu Chulainn, he says, I will never again be able to call my body and soul my own. When Cu Chulainn finds out Ferdia is coming to fight him, he says, I swear that he is the last person I would like to come up against, not because I fear him, but because of my great love for him. And then there's another bit when they meet. There's like an exchange of belittling words. They try to sort of ritually put each other off from the fight. And one of the things Cu Chulainn does is he brings up their time together and he says, we shared the same heart. You were my best comrade. We breathed the same air. You were dear above all. I will miss you, I swear. So they fight for 4 days, with very little to differentiate their skills because Scatha has trained her boys well. And at the end of the first day and at the end of the second day, the 2 meet and they wrap their arms around one another and exchange 3 kisses. They then swap food and medical supplies and their charioteers share a camp together. This story is a tragedy though, and on the morning of the 3rd day, Ferdia is looking not very well. And it's starting to be very obvious that it is Cu Chulainn that's going to win the fight. And their conversation turns from boasting and belittling to genuine bafflement and emotionality between them. Cu Chulainn asks Ferdia why he betrayed him for some woman, and Ferdia is able to explain it wasn't for a woman, it was because of his honour. Cu Chulainn, realising that no man can back out of a fight if his honour's at stake, yay toxic masculinity, he says, my brave heart is a dead weight, my soul torn from its roots. I'd welcome any other fate than to fight you, Ferdia. And this miserable exchange is meant to be almost joyful in comparison to how crap both of them are feeling at the end of day 3. On day 4, that's when the fighting stops because Cu Chulainn kills Ferdia. He tricks him, makes him think he's attacking him from the front, and then with his right foot kicks his legendary spear up Ferdia's bum, and that kills Ferdia. On realising what he's done though, Cu Chulainn is distraught. He carries Ferdia to Cu Chulainn's side of the river so that his enemies can't take his beloved from him in death. And then, overwrought by the grief as Ferdia dies, Cu Chulainn faints. When he rises, he delivers a poetic lament for his dearly beloved, which includes the verse, "I loved the blush in your cheek, your fine, upstanding young form. I loved your clear eye, your way of speech. I loved the way you held yourself." So with all these poetic quotes, it's not hard to paint this friendship between the two of them as being romantic. There seems to be a genuine and deep, sincere affection between the two of them. We cannot be certain, right, that in any version of these stories, at any point in history, the two of them were ever actually in a same-sex relationship. However, given the context we have, I don't think it's unlikely. And it's worth remembering that any resistance to the idea that these two heroes could have been gay for one another doesn't come from the Celtic tradition. That's a Christian and modern bias. Yes, Cu Chulainn also has female lovers and a wife that he goes on this big romantic journey for. But as a bi person, just because you've had a relationship with somebody of one gender doesn't mean you can't have a relationship with somebody of another gender. I'd suggest that this story stands by the likes of that of Achilles and Patroclus in being a reminder that the past is not some heterosexual monolith that some people like to paint it out to be. Anyway, that covers the point I wanted to make today, which is Cu Chulainn and Ferdia were gay for one another. But I do have plans to make more content around the Celts. That's across the Celtic diaspora, so the continental stuff, the Brythonic stuff, the Goidelic stuff, all of that. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to subscribe and join me in my chaos. Please like the video because then I know you liked it and that's nice to know. And any comments will be read with delight and enthusiasm. So if that's any incentive, if you want to make me feel delighted, please comment away. And with that, I guess all that's left for me to say is goodbye and take care.